I'm Kate Czaplinski for the HAN Network, and I'm joined in studio by our editorial director, John Kovach, and we're talking about the top 10 stories of the year. Now, by top, we mean stories across all of our 16 local news sites that got the most web hits in 2017. Not necessarily the most important stories, though some are serious and ongoing, others are a bit silly. Now, as I said, John Kovach joins me, and we're going to talk about what we think made those stories so interesting to some of our readers, John.
Well, Kate, Stratford has been in the spotlight politically. It was without a budget until just days ago. And the 10th story in terms of hits is the news that broke last week that the school administration has a plan to lay off 40 teachers. A petition has been started to try to save those jobs. There was a tremendous crowd at a meeting the other night of the Stratford Town Council. Superintendent says that this is because of a refusal to take furlough days. The Stratford Education Association president said he plans to meet with Superintendent Janet Robinson to call for a special Board of Education meeting. So this is a story that's going to remain in the spotlight and probably among the top hits into early 2018.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, just a couple of weeks left in the year, and this story, one of the top of 2017. People really interested in this because 40 layoffs. I mean, that would be a big cut in the schools. And as we said, you mentioned Superintendent Janet Robinson blaming the union, not wanting to take the furlough days, the union saying this is unfair. We don't want to have these days where our children aren't getting educations. We had up that photo from Monday night's meeting, as you said, that big crowd there. So obviously for updates on that story, StratfordStar.com.
And keep in mind, the reason this story is developing this late is because Stratford did not have a budget. The state did not have a budget. So there were a lot of towns in financial flux. I think this will be a story that will carry over into next year.
Yeah. All right, well, moving on to number 9 of our top stories based on web hits. Now, this was a story published by HAN's Darien Times back in October 2015, but it made the top stories of 2017, and I think particularly relevant this year as we've seen such large-scale and high-profile sexual assault cases in the last few months. Now, this story, titled 30 Years Later, The Dark Side of Darien Still Haunts by Susan Schultz, is the account of a woman who claims she was sexually assaulted at age 15 by Alex Kelly. Now, 2 other women accused Kelly of rape in 1986, and he was convicted in 1997 of rape and spent 10 years in prison. He was released for good behavior in 2007. Now, this woman, John, she spoke to the Times after a Facebook post on Kelly's new job included some comments from people that began questioning the validity of those rape accusations. So she shared what she experienced, the horror and the downward spiral that it led to in her life. Now, in 1995, 10 years after she alleges she was attacked, she would tell a Darien police detective what happened, but her statement was never used in court. Now, John, you actually covered this Alex Kelly case in Darien years ago.
I did. I was the assistant editor of the Darien Times when news broke in 1995 that police were at the Kelly family house. You knew something was up then. A few months later was the word that he was arrested and on his way back from Europe, and then the long 2 trials before he was convicted. It's always been a divisive case. You talk about the subject of this story coming forward because of Facebook posts denying that anything actually happened. And that is not a new thing. That dates back to really when the allegations first surfaced. So it's always been a divisive case.
And I do want to say, at the time of that story, back in 2015, Kelly told the Darien Times, if anyone approaches you with an allegation, please encourage them to go directly to the police. He said, I have nothing to hide, and while it may sell papers, it would be futile to try and defend myself in the media. That his statement at the time. Now, I have to wonder, it's amazing that this story, like we said, published in October 2015, a top story of 2017, and you have to wonder, I mean, just if kind of this movement we've seen in the last few months has had any impact on that. I think Susan did a good job of really showing and telling this woman's story. Her name was changed for the story. And as we said, none of her statements have been used in court previously. But it was a powerful story.
It is a story that I can see victims advocacy groups using to try to help women come forward with such allegations and say, look, here's one. These are decades old, and this person had the courage to come forward. I think that's where a lot of that traffic is coming from. But it is fascinating that even now, 30 years later, it remains a topic.
All right, well, moving on to number 8 of our top stories of the year. John, tell us about this one, New Canaan Youth Party, that made some headlines.
Well, March 25th, there was a youth party in New Canaan that made headlines after a 17-year-old New Canaan High student was seriously injured, and then questions were raised about the amount of time that passed before 911 was called, as well as the presence of alcohol at that party. Police later arrested 59-year-old Douglas Knight, who owned the house, for interfering with a 911 call, and they arrested his 18-year-old son, Andrew, for delivery of alcohol to a minor and permitting a minor to possess alcohol. There was a lot of anger in the community because the word was that the homeowner instructed people not at the party not to call 911. Police eventually did get called by someone who said, "I'm calling regardless." A young teen did end up in the hospital with some fairly serious injuries, and that's a case that really sparked discussion regionally.
Yeah, a lot of discussion, and you know, that student was in the hospital for 5 nights, so it was a fairly serious injury. And I know on CT Pulse, we actually, soon after that, John, had a guest from Trumbull's Partnership Against Underage Drinking kind of on to talk about a response to that and just parents' responsibilities if their teens or underage teenagers are drinking in their household. Kind of just that discussion, which we see come up again and again. But like you said, a lot of anger in the community over that story because of the discussion about whether 911 was called soon enough. Moving on to number 7 of our list of top stories, and that's the Reading Roadhouse. Folks in and around Reading have been extremely interested in the future of the Reading Roadhouse. Well, in October 2017, Sandra Diamond Fox of our Reading Pilot reported that the Roadhouse has new owners. You're seeing a picture of them right there, and this January, the landmark at 406 Reading Road will be back in business. The owner, Sean Riley, he also owns some restaurants in the city. He owns My Belly's Playlist, which is a neighborhood sandwich cafe with 2 locations in Manhattan. So interesting story there, one of our top, because people really want to know what's going to happen with that landmark.
Oh, it's been open and closed and open and closed in a cycle. It's a popular place when it is open, and people really want to know what's going on with the Reading Roadhouse.
Yeah, you know, you get some landmarks like that in these towns that people really get invested in. And even though they're businesses, you know, and businesses come and go, people really care and want to see something move in there. So, and obviously you have to put your money where your mouth is and go support the local business when it is there, right? That's the important point to take away. But John, tell us about our number 6 story.
This is a story that continues to be covered by the Wilton Bulletin, and it's a lawsuit against the town of Wilton and the Wilton Board of Education filed by the family of a preschool girl, alleging that she was sexually abused by paraprofessional Eric Von Cohorn at Miller Driscoll School. This allegedly happened in 2012. The suit was filed in 2015. And it really caused an uproar when motions were filed in an effort to have the suit dismissed, alleging that this girl, who was very young at the time, was quote-unquote flirtatious with a preschool paraprofessional. A lot of outrage on that. This case continues to move on, and you can follow that at wiltonbulletin.com. It should be going to court in 2018, barring any kind of a settlement.
Right. I mean, we covered this a lot. John Jeanette Ross at the Wilton Bulletin doing a great job covering this. But people were calling for the resignation of the Board of Education and for the superintendent after the details of their file to dismiss this case came forward. Like you said, I think one of the most disturbing details was saying that this preschool girl acted flirtatious in some way.
And they argued that they weren't saying it. It was the attorneys saying it.
Right. Now, Jeanette Ross says as of right now, the town's motion to dismiss was denied. The town then made a motion for the court to reconsider its denial, but that was also denied. So if no settlement, they are going to court in 2018. And of course, you can continue to follow that story at wiltonbulletin.com. Now, we have 5 more to go, but we're going to step out for a quick break, come back, talk about those 5 remaining stories that got the most hits this year, and also talk about what we think are some of the most important stories of 2017 after this.
UK Gourmet is the largest specialty grocer in the area, featuring food from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. Over 80 teas to choose from and a brilliant assortment of biscuits to go with them. Over 70 cheeses from grass-fed cows, which makes a smashing difference in taste. The creamiest chocolate you'll ever taste using no artificial colors or preservatives. So say hooray for UK Gourmet, 78 Stony Hill Road in Bethel, or visit ukgourmet.us.
Now teeing off, Paul Miller from Miller Nissan in Fairfield.
Excuse me, Mr. Miller. What about my new Sentra?
Right now, lease a 2017 Sentra S for only $97 a month.
He is never going to retire.
Welcome back. I'm Kate Czaplinski with editorial director John Kovach, talking about the top stories of 2017, by top meaning that got the most clicks, the most people reading these stories this year. And we are on number 5. John, tell us about that story.
This is a crash in Reading in which 6 teens from Fairfield, Easton, and Reading were all injured either critically or seriously. The car left the road, struck a tree, caught fire. Teenagers were ejected from the vehicle. This at Route 107 near Umpqua Road. And in October, 18-year-old Ryan Capozzello surrendered to Fairfield police. He's charged with DWI, reckless driving, 5 counts of second-degree assault with a motor vehicle. Police said he lost control. It hit the embankment on the right side, careened across both travel lanes, began to roll, hit trees. A really horrific crash. It's in court, and hopefully nobody is suffering lasting effects from that.
Yeah, I have to say it was a long investigation. That initial crash happening April 14th, and as you said, John, charges filed in October against that driver. 2 of those 6 passengers were ejected before that vehicle came to arrest. Just a serious crash, and I think it obviously got so many hits because so many young people involved, and you hate to see a story like that.
Multiple towns, multiple young people, and then you have the DUI side of it, which always builds interest.
Yeah. All right, well, moving on to number 4. This story is a much lighter note. It was a July 31st report that a full-size tiger was on the loose in Richfield near the Wilton border. It was one of our most read stories of the year. Now, of course, police never found the so-called tiger.
That's not it in the picture.
That's not it. That's the Richfield Tiger, right? The mascot of Richfield High School. But police believe it was a bobcat. However, they searched. I mean, they searched for this animal. Did not find it. Of course, as we mentioned, it also so happens that Richfield High School's mascot is a tiger, so maybe that added a little level of interest there. And in a quiet news time, July 31st, you hear a full-size tiger might be on the loose in Richfield. I think you're going to click on that. Now
you have an increase in the sightings of bobcats. You have the somewhat recent sightings of mountain lions, reports of that. So for there to be a wild cat would not be unheard of. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, so interesting there. So that was obviously one of the top Richfield stories of the year, but I should say, in speaking to our Richfield press editor, Steve Coulter, he said the popularity of the tiger tail is interesting, but he sees the press's top stories of the year is all their coverage on some major zoning issues in 2017, and I would agree. They had the Mountainside Rehab proposal in January, the Winter Club, and that's still kind of happening, and a bed and breakfast, which kind of went on summer through November. Now, those stories racked up more than a dozen Richfield Press front pages. Steve said that they each had various degrees of success here in town, but he thinks the larger context is that these neighborhoods feel threatened in Richfield, and these residents have united under that same umbrella to kind of keep some development out of their neighborhoods. And that's kind of been an ongoing theme in Ridgefield this year. He also said an honorable mention for top story in Ridgefield is the stolen cars and the shooting on Holda Lane in June. A young woman who was allegedly trying to break into a car there was shot in the back. That homeowner was later arrested after he was found to have drugs and a large amount of cash in one of those vehicles.
That a complex case that's still unfolding. And the bed and breakfast Airbnb, that debate, where essentially Airbnb is being compared by some to, the high-rise Hilton hotels.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see that debate unfold in the coming year.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to number 3. This was a story that actually started in the very beginning of the year. John, can you tell us about this one? Very
unusual, and it was in the Monroe Courier, and a student was in an altercation with 2 other students, and then news broke that there was a petition calling for this student, whose name was never known because he was not 18 years old, to be removed from Massac High School due to his alleged involvement with, quote, the social media attack on special needs students and African Americans. The petition got more than 3,000 signatures. It's still online, and we don't know really how that resolved because it involved a minor.
Right. Right. At the time, the student was suspended for a bit, but we don't know what happened with that. Massac's principal, Joe Cosba, at the time, saying that he couldn't comment on the specifics of the situation, but the school was working to resolve it with a number of different agencies. So yeah, a lot of people going to Board of Ed meetings in Monroe, calling for that student to leave. I know they posted some of these social media screenshots of the social media that they said was offensive. So a big story there in Monroe at the beginning of 2017. But moving on to number 2, again, a happier story, and that's that a baby was born on Route 25. This was also a Monroe Courier story, and on May 4th, 2017, a local OBGYN successfully delivered a baby on Route 25. Dr. Ronica Chowdhury received a phone call from a patient that said her delivery was imminent. Both of them were driving along Route 25. Beth Canone, who works for the doctor, said that she pulled over just past Route 15 in Trumbull to wait for her patient who was driving the same way. She then spoke with the patient who pulled off, and she delivered the baby right there. And thankfully, they delivered a healthy baby girl before police or EMS were able to arrive.
Great story. I love those.
People like those. That story made you feel good. So.
And people say the news media only reports bad. When it makes us feel good when a good story like that gets a ton of hits.
Definitely. Now moving on to...
We're to number 1.
To number 1. I mean, by far. This story really blew up on social media.
Remarkably far.
Remarkably far. And it has to do with a criminal maybe doing something not so smart. And I think people like those stories too. John, tell us a little bit about it.
There's so many shows and websites devoted to it. And this is someone doing something an attorney might not recommend. But the headline was, Waterbury man arrested for reclaiming bag of drugs at police department. So on Monday, September 25th, Shelton police arrested 23-year-old Davy McMillan of Waterbury when he entered the police station to reclaim a bag that he claimed he left behind at a scene police had visited earlier that day. Earlier on September 25th, Shelton police had responded to an incident involving McMillan in Shelton. Police did not disclose that incident at the time. Hours later, Shelton police were contacted and informed that McMillan had left a bag behind, and the caller wanted to turn it over to police. The caller informed police that it appeared to contain some kind of drugs. So Shelton police went to the scene, retrieved the bag, and officers confirmed that it contained crack cocaine. They took that bag and its contents back to Shelton Police Headquarters. A short time later, McMillan arrived to reclaim the bag, which he admitted to leaving earlier in the day, entered the police department lobby with a woman who was identified as a victim that, according to police, had a full no contact order against him.
Two things there, right?
Yeah, there's a number of things going wrong there, and that is a story that continues now 3 months later to generate interest on the internet.
I mean, that headline, you have to say it's good clickbait. Waterbury man arrested for reclaiming bag of drugs at the police department. I mean, that is going to get you a lot of clicks. But yeah, like you said, two things there. He reclaimed the bag that had crack cocaine in it, and he showed up with the woman that he was supposedly had a protective order against him. So 2 charges leveled against him there. That, as we said, just kind of blew up on social media. So those were the top 10 that got the most hits this year, John. But I know we have our own ideas about what we think some of the top stories are. What do you think?
I really think the elections, the municipal elections of 2017, are going to be big in terms of setting the stage for the 2018 governor's race, how these towns deal with the budget crisis, and just places where we saw transition. You saw Stratford, where there was a tidal wave that flipped it totally Democratic in the midterm election, so to speak, because their mayor serves a 4-year term. Now, this year you had a new mayor elected. Republican Laura Hoydick wins that, replacing John Harkins. And Republicans win back the town council after, as we said with the 10 story, no budget passed, the budget stalemate that lasted months. So Stratford, it'll be interesting to watch Vicky Tesoro in Trumbull. Tim Herbst did not run again. Vicky Tesoro gives Democrats the first selectman's office there. Just a couple of towns where it's in, and then you've got Mark Loretti in Shelton winning again, running unopposed, and running for governor, as is Mark Boughton in Danbury.
Yeah, and some of our strongly Republican towns in Fairfield County flipping the other way, going for Democrats. I mean, all around it was a very interesting municipal election. And, you know, our community newspapers, I think, just do a phenomenal job and an important job in covering those elections so well. We, of course, had our live election night broadcast thanks to all the staff. That was one of our top broadcasts of the fall.
Yes.
People are definitely interested, and should be, in who is getting elected in your town, because those are the people making the decisions that have a direct impact on you every day. So I agree with you. I think election coverage, big story of 2017. And I think, as Steve Coulter of the Richfield Press mentioned earlier, a lot of interesting development stories this year.
Yes.
Some of the ones he mentioned in Richfield, and Shelton having a lot of those. Shelter Ridge, a big proposal that's going forward, neighbors banding together to fight against that, and that having an impact on the election, as well as a proposed burlesque-themed club that wanted to move into Shelton off of Bridgeport Avenue. Big response to that. Kind of neighbors banding together in a lot of these towns to stop some of these things from moving in, whether you agree with them or not, you know. So I think those definitely big stories of 2017.
Yeah, development, and I'll be watching Shelton because that Bridgeport Avenue corridor is really the battleground for people who want to say enough, and people who say bring more business in.
Definitely. So those are just some of our picks for top stories of 2017 and our list of the most web hits. But of course, you can stay tuned in 2018 to all of our HAN Network news sites. We will bring you the best and latest local coverage. And we want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. We'll see you soon.